I died on the operating table. I died on the operating table. I died. Actually, I didn't die. Otherwise, I wouldn't be telling you this now. But I did go into cardiac arrest. I also enjoyed. I'm not sure if enjoyed is the right word. I also had an out-of-the-body experience. I was actually floating above the operating table, near the ceiling, and looking down as they worked on my body, as they administered chest compressions to bring me back from the dead. I saw all that, but that's not all I saw. I also saw 3 men in the operating room, men I didn't think belonged there. For one thing, they were all wearing prison jumpsuits. The first man I noticed had been young and good-looking once, but his classically handsome features were now dissipated and bloated, and he needed a shave. He seemed nervous, constantly looking around and touching his face with white hands with long artistic fingers. He had a face made for smiling, but he wasn't smiling now. Now his face was a mask of controlled anger. Controlled anger. The next man was his opposite in appearance. He was short and stocky, running to fat, with grizzled salt and pepper hair, a mustache decorating his broad, hungry face. And his eyes were small, dark, and unsmiling. He also needed a shave, and he had several chins. The third man was tall and blond and looked like a disheveled surfer. He stood back from the others, as if he was disinterested. But he was interested, deeply interested in me, as his watery gray eyes were focused on my body the entire time, like he wanted to eat me up. The first 2 men prowled and circled the room, while the third man, the tall blonde, leaned against a corner wall, just waiting for his opportunity to pounce. I continued to hover above the operating table, watching the doctors trying to bring me back to life. I found it mildly interesting, as if I was watching something on TV while channel surfing. And then, suddenly, I was back in my body and everything went black. I returned to consciousness slowly, very, very, very slowly, and found myself lying on a gurney in a big room, which I later learned was the recovery room. It was quiet in there, quiet as the grave. I looked around, taking in my surrounding with bleary eyes. The nurses seemed to be clustered around another patient at the other side of the room, someone in worse shape than me, if that was possible. Anyway, nobody was paying any attention to me. Not any medical personnel, that is. For 3 men, the 3 men from the operating room, stood in the doorway, staring at me, and then they approached my gurney. No one noticed them, and there was something unearthly, insubstantial about their appearance. In fact, they looked, well, dead. As they surrounded me, I noticed they didn't appear to be breathing. They stood over me and regarded me coldly, like I was a slab of meat. The short one spoke first. He had a rather gravelly voice. "He appears to be alive, and therefore useless for our purposes. None of us can enter him while he lives and his soul is in place." The man who had once been good-looking answered him, "Oh, we can take care of that little problem." And as he said it, I noticed he was looking directly at a tray of surgical instruments, knives, scalpels, and saws. The third man said nothing. He just stared at me. The man who had once been good-looking said, "I claim his mortal remains for my spirit by right of seniority." To which the short one answered, "Screw that." "I've got the highest score too," the man who had once been handsome said, with a totally ghastly smile. "Screw that," answered Shorty. The third man said nothing. He just stared at me. "We could flip a coin," Handsome said. "There's 3 of us," Shorty replied. "Well, what the hell are we supposed to do then? Rock, paper, scissors?" I noticed that the whole time the 2 men were arguing, they were both edging towards the tray of surgical instruments, while the third man said nothing. He just stood back from the others and stared at me. The short one pounced first, grabbing a scalpel off the instrument tray with a ham fist. But the man who had been good-looking was too fast for him and grabbed his fat arm. But the short man was quick too. He managed to pull loose and swung the scalpel across the other's throat, nicking an artery and sending a jet of blood spurting across the room. But the handsome man had grabbed a surgical mallet and, at the exact same moment, cracked it over Fatso's head, caving in his skull. As both collapsed onto the hospital floor, the third man stepped forward, almost casually, placed 2 strong, dirty hands around my throat, and began strangling me. I began to sputter and choke as I looked into his watery gray eyes, which were practically bulging out of their sockets. The tip of his tongue protruded from between his thin lips. He was panting. His mouth was wide open too, displaying his hard yellow teeth. I think he was actually going to bite into my flesh. I was making a horrendous racket and was immediately surrounded by a covey of anxious nurses, and my assailant disappeared. In fact, all 3 men disappeared. What were they? Ghosts? Evil spirits? Had the first 2 managed to kill each other? Again? Can you die when you're already dead? And what happened to the third one? Was he gone for good? Or would he be back? For me? I spent another 6 days in hospital, as they wanted to ensure my condition had stabilized before they allowed me to go home. For I live alone, without a caregiver. It's impossible to sleep in the hospital, and so I lay awake all night. and the three men returned and stood in the doorway to my private room. I could hear them. When I did manage to sleep, I saw them too, in my dreams, and I came to understand who they were and what they wanted. They were evil spirits who wanted me, wanted my body. They came to me when I was dying, on the point my soul was leaving my body, and each of them planned to enter me, to let their evil spirit take the place of my departing soul, and so they would live again in my body. But unfortunately for them, I survived. But that didn't faze them. All they had to do then was murder me. Dead is dead, natural or unnatural. And they hadn't given up yet. The noises from the corridor and the bad dreams were at their worst for the first 2 nights, but then faded away, only to torment me again after I returned home. Again, I saw them in my dreams, and when awake, I heard them too, luckily from outside the house. I would lie in bed, totally frozen in sheer terror, listening to them arguing, the sound no louder than a whisper or the sighing of the wind. And then one night I steeled my nerves and looked out through a crack in the blinds. The 3 men stood at the end of my driveway. I closed the blinds and hid under the covers. I'd always thought there was something familiar about these 3 evil men. I'd seen their faces somewhere before. They were criminals or murderers or something like that. So I went online and did an image search under serial killers. And I found them. The man who had been young and good-looking once was Ted Bundy, Seattle Ted, the co-ed killer, responsible for at least 30 to 35 murders. His high score. Executed in the electric chair in Florida on January 24th, 1989. His seniority in death. The short one was John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown who buried the bodies of his victims in the crawl space of his suburban home. Killer of 33, he was executed by lethal injection in Illinois on May 10th, 1994. The third man was Jeffrey Dahmer, the cannibal who kept body parts in his fridge. Maybe he really did want to eat me. Responsible for 17 murders, he was beaten to death in prison on November the 28th, 1994. Oh my God! My God! Someone just rang my doorbell. There's someone at the front door. At 2 a.m.? Oh God. I hope it's only the black-eyed children. The moral of the story: there really are things worse than death. Or the only serial killers worth encountering are those that eat their Budweiser breakfast of champions. That didn't sound quite right. Wasn't that supposed to be Wheaties? If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and original horror stories featuring such cryptids as the Night Floaters, werewolves, and the Black-Eyed Children. So again, please consider subscribing. Please help me to reach my goal of 2,021 subs in 2021. Till midnight. Cheers. Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pix here. That's PX here. While the music was The Chilling, The Dread by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod.